try to understand the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration.
James Carver, host of Unblocked Creators, where we dive deep into the lives of artists, philosophers, scientists, creators of all kinds to find out how they find their way to live purposeful lives and be supported in this sea of existential confusion and chaos, or something like that. Today, I have an exciting guest. I've been waiting for this one for a while. Mr. Dennis McKenna is an ethnopharmacologist. He has studied plant hallucinogens for over 40 years. Make that 50 years. I'm reading this from the back of his autobiography called The Brotherhood of the Screaming Abyss, My Life with Terence McKenna, which now came out 10 years ago. He is the author of many scientific papers and co-author with his brother, Terence McKenna, of The Invisible Landscape, Mind, Hallucinogens, and the I Ching, and also Psilocybin Magic Mushroom Grower's Guide. He holds a doctorate from the University of British Columbia, where his research focused on ayahuasca and ukuhe, two hallucinogens used by indigenous peoples in the northwest Amazon. He received postdoctoral research fellowships in the Laboratory of Clinical Pharmacology at the National Institute of Mental Health and in the Department of Neurology, Stanford University School of Medicine. In 1990, he joined Shaman Pharmaceuticals as Director of Ethnopharmacology, and in 1993 became the Aveda Corporation's Senior Research Pharmacognosist. Dennis has been an adjunct assistant professor at the Center for Spirituality and Healing at the University of Minnesota since 2001, and in, I believe, it doesn't say here, but I believe it was around 2019 that he moved from Minnesota to Abbotsford, British Columbia, Canada, where he now resides with his wife. He has taught summer field courses in Peru and Ecuador and has conducted fieldwork throughout the Upper Amazon. He's a founding board member of the Hefter Research Institute, a nonprofit organization focused on the investigation of the potential therapeutic uses of psychedelic medicines. So welcome, Dennis McKenna.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Well, it's been a few years since our first encounter, and we did an interview about 5 years ago when I was writing for a magazine and got that published in print, and now the podcast is finally set up that I've imagined for years, and so I'm really grateful to finally have this chance for a follow-up conversation.
Me too. What is the name of your podcast?
It's called Unblocked Creators.
Sounds good. Okay.
So I like to talk to people, a lot of artists, about how they found their way as artists, how they're continuing to find their way, and some of them have made careers out of it. Some, they don't worry about that. And then you are also a creative. You've done a lot of writing, and you've done a variety of creative things, and you're also a scientist. So we get to sort of dance in different arenas with you here. But the premise is helping people find out how to have more creative agency over the life that they want to live.
Okay.
And be supported in living purposefully. So you're an interesting example because you've lived a very unordinary life. Your career path hasn't been very orthodox.
No.
So you've had to find your way, and kind of a strange way. So people who know of your life story will know that you've had some wild adventures.
True enough.
So I wonder, maybe we could jump into something that a lot of people like to hear Terence's raps about. Your brother Terence.
Yeah.
He sort of got a new wave of fame when YouTube came along, and his old talks became, they started spreading in the underground,
Right.
and he talked about the stoned ape hypothesis,
Right.
or maybe you guys called it the theory.
Right.
And I think you guys, you might have written about it somewhere together, but the stoned ape hypothesis proposes that psilocybin mushrooms played a key role in the development of the human brain, maybe in our ability to use language, maybe the very nature of our consciousness.
Yes. Yes.
So,
And it's a theory that has been vilified and condemned when it was first proposed, continues to be vilified and condemned, but mostly by people that don't know anything about it. I mean, the knee-jerk reaction is, of course, this is ridiculous, and these people are just nuts, and I can understand that reaction. But actually, I read something recently that was talking briefly about the stoned ape theory, and just said, well, there's no fossil evidence for it. Well, in fact, there is fossil evidence for it, as it turns out. You're not going to find a hominid jawbone with pieces of mushroom stuck between the teeth. That kind of fossil evidence you won't find. But fossil evidence you will find in conjunction with circumstantial evidence, what you might call circumstantial evidence. For example, we know that hominids evolved in northern Africa, probably also in southern Africa, but it seems like the action took place in northern Africa between 2 and 3 million years ago. These lineages of hominids, to distinguish them from apes, they were not apes, they were early humans. And there were several lineages evolving in that area at that time. There was not one single lineage, there were multiple lineages of what you might call genus Homo, or what were called genus Homo. And there's and the reason we know this is fossil evidence. So that's not and it's very sparse, but we know it's there. The other form of fossil evidence that the people that condemn this or dismiss it don't consider, maybe are not aware of, there's fossil evidence for cattle, or cattle, the precursors of cattle, in that same area, in that same period. So cattle and hominids, mushrooms live in the dung of these cattle. That's what it grows on. You can look at any tropical ecosystem today with a similar climate, rainy, warm, lots of rainfall, cattle. You're going to find mushrooms in those. Any ecosystem today will have that. There's every reason to think that ecosystems 2 million years ago in this area, and we know from paleoclimatic data that the northern Sahara area was not a desert at the time. There were cyclical periods of rainy epochs, much wetter epochs, where it became essentially lake country, lots of rainfall. These cattle were there. The hominids were there. Obviously, the hominids were hunting the cattle and depending on them for a lot of things, meat, clothing, whatever. They exploited these cattle. The mushrooms just had to be there. I mean, you can't prove it, but given that any similar ecosystem today would have mushrooms in it, the mushrooms were likely there. Mm-hmm. Well, these hominids are scavenging in the environment, and they're sharp-eyed. They're looking for anything that might be good to eat. Mm-hmm. And big clusters of purple mushrooms growing out of the cow pies are obviously a target. So they were probably eating these mushrooms. They were certainly eating these mushrooms. Some people have criticized, and I think it's a valid criticism, some people have criticized the use of the stoned ape trope because it dismisses this. It diminishes it. It implies that the apes were, well, in the first place, there weren't apes.
They weren't apes, yeah.
But they were eating these mushrooms and they were getting loaded, and we all know that makes you disoriented and incompetent. Quite the opposite, actually. And some people have suggested that we should change the narrative and we should start talking about the awakened ape, which I think is a better way to put it, because the stoned ape theory, or the trope as it's presented, is that, you know, these hominids were in this environment and they were consuming mushrooms probably on a regular basis, and far from being disoriented at low doses, psilocybin mushrooms can lead to an extreme focus on the environment. And as I've often said in my talks, psychedelics bring the background forward, you know, and modern humans are so programmed to put everything in the background and focus on what's right in front of them, right? And that comes from looking at books and screens and things like that too much. It creates a separation between us and what we're apprehending. It's safe to say that early hominids, and as you also find in indigenous people, they don't have this sense of separation from what's in the environment, you know. So they're more tuned in, and they are very astute observers of the environment and of processes going on in the environment that we suppress. They're still there, but we're programmed to ignore them, you know, because of our conditioning, our literacy, all of these things, that we're a very hyper visually oriented species. We've evolved that way.
Yeah.
Indigenous people are not, if they've escaped what you might even call the curse of literacy. Their perception of the environment is much more holistic, you know, and I believe it's probably very much similar to the way that children apprehend their environment, you know. And if you look at a little kid, somebody who can't read, you know, a very young kid, you can see that they're just completely open. They're just taking it all in. And early hominids were probably much like that. And so they, far from being something that disorganized people, their apprehension and interaction with the environment, which was certainly full of dangers. You know, there was not only cattle there, but there were dangerous animals, saber-toothed tigers, all of this stuff. But we know from our own experience that you can become, at low doses, highly focused on the environment, you know, more than natural. And this is also why I've often said that in some sense you could say that mushrooms, you can view the psychedelic experience as, particularly mushrooms, almost as a scientific instrument. It's a lens through which you can view the world, and because it brings this background forward, it gives you the opportunity to look at processes very, very closely, you know. And the closer you look, the more complexity you see, and it gives you the ability to understand that and appreciate that. And so, in some sense, it's a stimulant of curiosity, and curiosity is what drives discovery. Curiosity is primarily what drives science these days. If you're not curious about something, you never bother to find out anything. But if you're curious, you want to understand something. Well, I think the same impulse worked in these early humans, you know, that it gave them a way, just like it does for us modern humans, it gives us a way to step out of our usual reference frame and look at things from a different perspective. So there's that. And then at higher doses, you know, and it's obviously, it's very unlikely these people were not weighing their mushrooms out on scales, you know, they were eating whatever's there. They were getting both, in some circumstances, low doses, in other circumstances, rather substantial doses, in other circumstances, completely outrageous doses. And at those doses, the focus so much does not become your focus on the environment. It becomes focused on the inner processes.
Yeah.
And the things that you see, the hallucinations that you see on high doses of mushrooms are very hard. We take them today and we're completely astonished at what we see, and we can't say, what are these things? Are these machines? Are these organisms? Are they, we can't tell, but we can see these things. And a lot of what the brain does, is they create, we don't live in the reality. We live in a model of reality that our brains construct. Neuroscientists now call this the default mode network. That does not do it justice. Default mode network basically means the behavioral and perceptual processes that underlie ordinary waking consciousness.
The conditioned lens.
The conditioned ones, yeah. The default mode network is what we are normally in when we're not stoned. Mm-hmm. It's what we pretty much, it's important to have that so that we can function, we can drive a car, we could, open a can of tuna fish, we could do these things.
Yeah.
But at high doses, you can't do that. You're in a completely different state. And you apprehend everything, but what the brain does is it constructs this default mode network, which I prefer to call the reality hallucination. It is a model of reality. It's not reality. It's what the brain constructs. It takes information from the outside through our sensory neural interfaces, our sensory neural receptors. It combines that with associations and memories and all sorts of internal processes, almost like you put all this in a blender, and it extrudes a model of reality.
Yeah.
That's the reality you live in.
And it feels like I can see three-dimensional space accurately. I can see the colors of everything.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. It makes sense enough that it doesn't interfere with our survival mechanisms. In fact, it facilitates it.
Right.
And you live in this, but it isn't reality. It's a construct that you've created in order to adapt your sensory abilities to what you think is good, to make sense out of reality, and neurophysiology or neurophysiology studies have shown that this is exactly true. We think of vision, for example, and vision seems like a pretty coherent kind of thing. I can look at you, and it all seems pretty clear that, you're over there and so on. But if you think about what's going on inside the brain to construct that, if you could look at the next level, you see like it's a bunch of lines, it's a bunch of, colors, it's a bunch of different stuff. For one thing, it's all upside down, right? The optical system turns it right side up and weaves all this together.
Yeah.
It's the difference between looking at like a staticky television where you can't exactly tell what is going on to a clear picture. But that's a construct of the mind, right? Yeah. And so the mushrooms give you the ability to, in the postulate of the stoned ape theory or the awakened ape theory is that mushrooms gave people the ability to construct this inner world and have it make sense and have it and not just perceptually but in terms of its noetic content or its meaningfulness. The word is portentiousness. It makes people not only construct this visual model that they live in, but attribute meaning to it. And the meaning is often associated with image and sound, right? These things go together. And if you look at language, so what we're talking about here is synesthesia.
Yeah.
Synesthesia is a translation of different sensory modalities into each other. So seeing music, as an example, or seeing sounds,
Yeah. And when people take psychedelics, they experience a lot
and they
of
experience synesthesia. They experience synesthesia. That's why they take it, because it's fun. They're beautiful, and it's quite an experience. But just in ordinary perception, we're engaging in synesthesia all the time, because language is effectively a process of synesthesia that takes place. It's based on sound, image, and the association between those things,
Mm-hmm.
So, we can say a word, chair, for example. Chances are you're going to have an image of a chair in your head, it's something like that. So this synesthetic ability, which is a learned skill, effectively, that mushrooms facilitated, is the basis of consciousness. It's the basis of language, where, these small mouth noises that we're making, these meaningless small mouth ape noises that I'm making to you right now,
Mm-hmm.
they're only meaningful because we have a consensus understanding that they do mean something. And I say something and you speak English and you understand them. So this is going on all the time, this synesthetic process that underlies conscious apprehension.
Yeah.
And that's why we say that the mushroom stimulated, consciousness. It gave us the ability to construct this reality hallucination, this coherent map of reality,
Yeah.
which resembles whatever is out there, which we don't know. It's unknowable. I mean, the physicists can tell us all kinds of things about how it really is with their instruments.
Yeah.
Enough that if we believe the instrument, we know that reality doesn't look like anything like what we're experiencing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the mushrooms taught us how to be conscious. The question then becomes, how is this transmitted across generations? And this is this is something that that Terence's theory didn't really address, but my theory addresses it. Because when he wrote his book, we didn't know about these things. But a couple of things. We know from studies of psilocybin, clinical studies, it causes not only the acute effects of the psychedelic experience, but it has long-term effects, which are related to synaptogenesis, the formation of synaptic connections, to neurogenesis, the formation of new neural pathways. Mm-hmm. This is all subsumed under the rubric of neuroplasticity. The mushroom stimulates neuroplasticity. The brain is anything but a static organism. It used to be thought that, you're born with a certain complement of neurons and it's downhill from there. No, it's not that at all. The brain changes over time, and certain things, including certain chemicals like psilocybin, can stimulate neurogenesis and the growth of these structures. Mm-hmm. And it is the basis of the complexification of the neural structure, which is a process that can be traced evolutionarily by looking at the fossil record. The hominids of 2 million years ago, Homo habilis, or whatever the species was, had a brain about 500 cubic centimeters. And it tripled in size over millions of years, but not very many millions of years, a couple of millions of years. That's not very long in evolutionary terms. So the brain, the size and the complexity of the brain basically exploded over 2 million years. And we became these big-brained, problematic, language-using, consciousness-using, symbol-using
Yeah.
organisms, and we became what we are, and we are problematic in many ways because of that. What propagated that across generations? We know these processes took place in individual development, but what propagated them over generation? How could this be transmitted down the generations? Well, it turns out there is this mechanism, not even really known or discussed when Terence wrote his book, but this mechanism called epigenetics. And epigenetics is the mechanism that enables this to happen. Epigenetics is post-transcriptional modification of the genome, changes in the gene expression profile due to environmental stimuli, which can be chemicals or other kinds of experiences. I mean, trauma will do this also in a negative way.
And those epigenetic changes can be heritable?
These changes are inheritable because it unlocks, it unwraps, it enables the expression of genes which are in the DNA but not expressed until some environmental or other stimulus unlocks these genes. They're mostly locked up in these structures called histones, which are basically like knots of DNA where the genes are in there, but they're not expressed. They can't be transcribed.
Yeah.
But environmental stimuli can unwind these histones effectively and allow these gene sequences to be expressed. Once expressed, they're heritable. And it's not a gamete transmitted type. Once expressed and instantiated into the somatic genome, it also extends to the genome that in the egg and sperm that's transmitted. So this is the mechanism. This is how it's worked. And the people that dismiss this whole stoned ape theory, or what we now call, what I'd like to change the terminology to call the awakened ape, they dismiss all this. They just say, well, there's no fossil evidence. Well, yes, there is fossil evidence. I just outlined it. And beyond that, there's other types of evidence. And beyond that, what else can explain this rapid evolution of the human neural structure over a mere 2 million years? Obviously, the hominids evolving in this environment were subject to all sorts of pressures. I mean, there was talk about an intense learning environment.
Right.
They had all kinds of things to deal with. Predatory animals. They had to find.
Yeah, they better have been very awake.
Right. They had to become very awake, and people say, well, they learned to become, good spear throwers, and that was how they became. Well, they did have to become good spear throwers, definitely, and
language
they had to learn how to make good spears. But I don't think that accounts for the whole thing, because,
Well, it was like 100,000 years or something that the frontal cortex developed, right?
The timeline is around it's around 2 million years, maybe a little more than that. But these different hominid species, I mean, it wasn't a completely linear process. It wasn't a linear process, but roughly, you had Homo habilis, you had Homo habilis, I'm thinking of Australopithecus, which wasn't really a hominid. That was previously. But the Homo habilis was probably the first true hominid. Eventually, that led to Homo erectus, which was kind of in the middle. So if Homo habilis had a brain of 500 cubic centimeters, Homo erectus was 1,000 cubic centimeters. And then along came Homo neanderthalensis and Homo sapiens, which are really not separate, not really different. It's not a linear thing. There were Homo Neanderthals and Homo erectus were uh, contemporaneous, living in the same environment. But Homo erectus, which was the next step, kind of, probably was effectively a neurologically modern human, you know, and then Homo sapiens and Homo Neanderthal was a further iteration of that.
Yeah.
But we know from fossil evidence that Homo erectus found its way all over the world. I mean, it evolved in Africa, but there's been fossil discoveries in Java, you know, in India and other parts of the world. So this was a global ranging species, and effectively at that point, that was a neurologically modern human.
Yeah.
And if they had this association with mushrooms, again, the mushrooms, they were probably not pastoral people, but the mushrooms were in the environment and the cattle were there. And as the people migrated, so did the cattle, and they brought the mushrooms along with them.
Yeah.
You know, so.
Well, it's cool to hear from you after decades has passed since the theory was originally developed and a lot of science has progressed, because I'm sure millions of people, I think, like me, you know, took mushrooms and they saw that my internal model of reality is reconstituted.
Yes.
It's dissolved and given the opportunity for update.
Right. Right.
And now curiosity overrides the kind of false certainty of the model. So it makes sense when we hear the stoned ape theory.
Right.
Yes, why would it not? Why would these fungi have been here for they've been here longer than we have. Of course
much longer.
Of course our ancestors ate them.
Right.
And here's the effect. So when you eat them, it's not hard to believe the theory likely holds true.
Yeah, as I say when I talk about this, it moves the needle from plausible to more than likely.
Yeah.
You know, this additional evidence that we have about neuroplasticity. Nobody knew anything about this when Terence wrote his book. The idea that psilocybin and other psychedelics could do this, that it was thought, it just wasn't even discussed. But now there's plenty of clinical studies and neurological studies showing that it does affect this neuroplasticity, and it has a lot to do with the therapeutic use, the therapeutic effects of these things, that you know, the brain's ability to adapt to all sorts of environmental and internal insults and deal with it. So that's pretty much a settled issue. And then you know, I guess what's you know, we know this took place. If it takes place in us, it probably took place in the early hominids, and then the mechanism of how you transmit across generations is epigenetics addresses that issue.
It makes a lot of sense to me.
Good.
So we've gone on an excursion through ancient history, and our potential ancient relationship with psilocybin and likely other
right.
mind-altering plants.
I mean, the one point that I think you can make a reasonable supposition that psilocybin was in the environment. The one thing that's kind of interesting and unique about psilocybin is no technology needed, right? All that's needed is curiosity, the curiosity to bend over and eat this damn thing that's growing in front of you. You don't have to know how to. I mean, something like ayahuasca, that is a very sophisticated preparation. That's practically a pharmaceutical preparation compared to mushrooms, just ready to eat, you know?
Yeah.
And that's different too, you know?
Well, now there's a lot of research that's happened in the clinical trials, and this has become more widely known in just the past 10 or so years. It's probably been amazing for you to see from when almost nobody had even heard of ayahuasca to now that it's like kind of household knowledge that psilocybin mushrooms have actual therapeutic potential.
Yeah.
So, as you've said, the pharmaceutical industries, and this has to be recognized now. It's on the table for discussion.
It is on the table for discussion. Yeah. I mean, it's good. I think certainly people people that were taking psychedelics back in the 60s and so on, it was pretty obvious that it had benefits. We thought it had benefits. Other people said, well, these degenerate hippies, they're just out there for cheap thrills. But actually, no. By and large, I think people took psychedelics. Even back then, they were pretty serious about it. And if they paid any kind of attention at all, they were aware of the fact that there's nothing new about these things. There's millennia of indigenous use. And, it's at the center of spiritual traditions throughout the world, and it's much more meaningful, in my opinion, but then I'm obviously biased. But, I mean, it's interesting that in Mazatec shamanism, in the Mexican shamanism, psilocybin was, the mushrooms were called teonanacatl, which means the flesh of the gods. And it turns out that's not the only tradition they were called that. There are similar terms in Egypt, for example, and other parts of the world. And one thing that Paul's book makes clear is that this was not confined to Mexico. This was a global phenomenon for many millennia. This book. Science is often slow to recognize things and to admit things, but I'm pleased. I mean, a lot of the work that was done on psilocybin in the mid-aughts, you can attribute a lot of that to Roland Griffiths and his group at Johns Hopkins.
Yeah.
And the thing is, science is inherently conservative. It tends to be, but it also is, and it's one of the beauties of science, it's open to new data. If there's new data and it's valid,
it's
then,
experimental.
Yeah, they can accept it. I mean, there'll be resistance. Always there are people that cling to the old, but eventually these new paradigms are recognized. And I think at a certain critical point, the potential of psychedelics, both for therapeutic use and really as a tool to study the mind and consciousness, it just got overwhelming. And so there was much greater acceptance of it. Mm-hmm. An interesting sort of maybe unanticipated consequences of that was the fact that as psychedelics found their way into clinical practice, into biomedicine became confronted with the necessity to confront the reality of the spirit. Medicine had been trying to exorcise spirit for 150 years, beginning with the Renaissance and all that, but particularly with the discovery of natural products at the beginning of the 19th century. The first alkaloid to ever be isolated in a pure form was morphine from the opium poppy. Mm-hmm. And morphine had most of the properties of opium, right? So it was analgesic, it was euphoric, it did all these things that we attribute to opium. And so, but it was obviously not alive, right? It was a crystal. It was a constituent of opium, but it changed the perspective, because before, even in science, there was this idea that the plants really, they have a spirit. They have a
Yeah.
divine spark, that living things have a divine spark that non-living things don't.
Mm-hmm.
And that is sort of, but there was no real evidence for that. It was just kind of a supposition. Well, the isolation of morphine was a demonstration that no, living things are just complex machines. That's all they are.
Mm-hmm.
They're machines, they're biochemical engines that run on neurotransmitters and hormones, and that's what they are. There's nothing special about them. And that's been then following the discovery of morphine, that I sometimes call the 19th century was the age of alkaloids. Alkaloids are very often CNS active. They also happen to be quite easy to isolate because of their acid-base nature. You can extract them and crystallize them. So there was a whole series of alkaloids discovered in the 19th century following the discovery of morphine. Nicotine and cocaine and hyoscyamine and atropine and all of these alkaloids, all of which were more or less psychoactive and had therapeutic effects.
Yeah.
So that contributed to the idea that, there is no spirit in nature.
It's just material.
Just material. But then interestingly, at the end of this process, one of the last alkaloids to be isolated was mescaline from the peyote cactus. And that was the beginning of the reintroduction of spirit into medicine and into science, because these psychedelics, what do? I mean, morphine, relieves pain, cocaine stimulates you, but psychedelics open up, this whole realm of experience. So gradually, as psychedelics began to be investigated, medicine has had to confront that effectively this new generation, this new class of medicines are actually medicines to treat the spirit. In a certain way, you could put it that way. And so science has to admit, well, maybe the spirit is real after all. Sure, it has a neurological basis, but maybe it's not limited to that. So anyway, it reintroduces that whole trope into the conversation,
Yeah. Well, that's, people who have a large dose mystical experience, they're going to say, yeah, it was a spiritual experience. And
right.
Maybe someone who was an atheist oftentimes will realize, oh, there's something about this spirit.
Maybe they have to rethink it.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So for me, it was definitely a reawakening to spirit and a non-rational, it's a non-material experience of synchronicity, right? When you experience a lot of synchronicity, there's no mechanical, material explanation that I can find.
That's right.
But you experience it and it's real.
So, yeah, it's real, and it's a real element of our experience of the world, and maybe it's a way of reminding ourselves that you only think you have it all figured out. You don't actually know shit. And that for me is the lesson, the message of psychedelics is remember how little we know.
Yeah.
Humility, science is not noted for humility, but it should be more humble. It's a really useful tool for asking questions of nature in a systematic way that you can answer in a hopefully verifiable way, but always provisionally, right? That's what science does. It constructs hypotheses. It constructs effectively highly structured suppositions about how a process works.
True enough.
And then if you're honest about it, you try to demolish that theory. You try to find what are the chinks, what are the shortcomings, what does it not explain?
Yeah.
Science these days doesn't always do that, because science now it's big science, and it's tied up with
Profit-driven
big
results.
business and pharmaceutical development and all of these things. So it makes it even harder for scientists to abandon those models. But if you practice it honestly, that is what science is. In its purest form, science is the search for truth, and it's one of the most powerful tools that we have to really search for a true understanding of how the world is, and we always have to keep in mind that it's like you never prove anything in science. You just can't disprove things, right? I mean, you have suppositions, and all you can do is say, our hypothesis is consistent with the data as far as we know, but you always have to keep open the door to the idea that some discovery will come along next week or next month or 50 years from now that will completely overturn
even
your
something
supposition.
that seems totally true still, like Newtonian physics, right? It's like, it's not a complete model
Right.
of the actual reality.
Right. Newtonian physics is a perfect example, and it was very good, and it still is. It's useful.
Yeah.
But we have to use it knowing that it's a model, and it's good to measure and look at certain things, but it is not what reality looks like. At the quantum level and at the cosmic level, you get all these relativistic and quantum, characteristics, all of which are almost beyond human comprehension. So science could do with more humility. I mean, if you practice science honestly, I think that you can't not be humble. I mean, I think, because of this, it's always a work in process, and the models are always incomplete.
Yeah.
I'm sometimes amused by every few years some scientists or somebody will come out with a book that called The End of Science, which is sort of basically we've got it all figured out. There's just some mop up to do, but we've got the basics down, and then something will come along that completely blows it up.
Yeah.
And that tells you there's an infinite amount left to learn. And I think that's a good thing.
It's exciting.
Yeah, it's exciting.
Well,
what else are we going to do?
Right. There's more to discover, yeah. It wouldn't be very fun if we already knew everything.
Right, exactly.
So it was about 5 years ago, I think, maybe a bit longer ago, when we sort of first sat down for an interview. The McKenna Academy was a new creation then, and now it's slightly less new, but a lot has happened.
Yes.
And it's called the McKenna Academy for Natural Philosophy, right? Mm-hmm. Which, am I right that natural philosophy refers to basically the precursor to science?
Yeah, in some sense, yes. I mean, that is natural philosophy was in a sense the precursor to science before science became so preoccupied with quantification and reductionism and all of those things, measurement, and all of which is good. I don't disrespect those things, but science in a way diminished itself because it forgot or it denied that there are other ways of knowing that don't involve those kinds of things, and that's a part of reality too. That's where science can learn a lot from indigenous worldviews, because they recognize this, that there are multiple ways of knowing. Some of them are hard to quantify them. That doesn't invalidate them. So I named it the McKenna Academy for Natural Philosophy just because I wanted to create an umbrella for inquiry and discussion and thinking that covers virtually everything. So natural philosophy is everything.
It's a nice umbrella. It's a nice way to give yourself some freedom.
Yeah, exactly.
Think about anything.
Exactly.
So just recently I noticed that the McKenna Academy is also launching some curriculum, or has launched courses on plant biochemistry. I
Yes.
think there was some related to shamanism.
Right.
What can you tell me about this?
Well, for a long time, we have. I mean, the academy implies that it doesn't imply, it actually states where we view our mission as education, basically. And in a broader sense, I think we view our mission as, to a certain extent, bridging traditional knowledge and modern knowledge, scientific knowledge, because these things are not separate. One evolved out of the other, and they continue to enrich each other.
Yeah.
So there is that aspect of science, and then I think a central sort of preoccupation of the McKenna Academy is this sense of wonder that we've been talking about. The universe is marvelous.
It's beautiful.
And it's complex in ways that we can't even imagine. It was Haldane was famous for the statement that the universe is not only stranger than you suppose, it's stranger than you can suppose.
Yeah.
And I think that's true. There are endless surprises, So I think that's kind of the central idea of the McKenna Academy, and basically that gives us license to explore any damn thing we want and talk about anything we want to. So
Yeah.
it's by its very nature, it has to be, it's open-ended. And there's so much going on in this whole thing. I become quite interested these days. I'm become quite interested in AI.
Yeah.
And other things, and I'm quite both fascinated by it and terrified by it. I mean, it is really.
Yeah.
People say it may be the end of humanity, and I think there's a possibility that it might be. What I am concerned about this thing about the spirit that we were talking about. I feel like we're outsourcing our spirit, our creativity, our innate humanness to machines, and the machines, these algorithms. I mean, we're kind of going off on a tangent here, but
I like it.
This is
We'll tie it in.
everything ties in.
Yes.
I've been preoccupied with this lately. That we're these chat GPT and other types of things, they're very seductive because they can give you the impression that there's a consciousness there.
Right.
There isn't a consciousness there. There is no presence in the AI, but there's a very good simulation.
So this is, I think, really hard for people to grasp, because
It's very hard.
why does intelligence? We recognize other intelligent beings,
Right.
and so then you interact with a machine that it's modeled on our language.
Right.
So it has all this like implicit knowledge, and it seems intelligent, but then I think there's all kinds of questions now to ask about what intelligence is exactly, and then what is creativity and what is wisdom. And
It raises all these questions.
yeah,
And it can simulate intelligence. It can simulate creativity. But I think you put your finger on it. It can't simulate wisdom. That comes from us.
yeah,
And the thing that we're confronted with AI is that sort of many of the same things that happened initially with the internet, and then with social media, and then along comes AI. Well, all of these things, social media has also been certainly a two-edged sword. These technologies are double-edged. They can be used for great benefit. AI can be used in very useful and beneficial ways. It can also be used in very destructive ways.
Yeah.
Same with social media. I mean, social media kind of emerged as ways for people to connect and keep in touch with each other and create communities and all that. And what we've seen is, it's become, I mean, it does connect, but it tends to not connect communities. It tends to create silos of communities that don't talk to each other.
Yeah.
And,
like fragmented echo chambers.
And AI is much the same. And I think that we have to be very concerned. The issue with any of these, what's different, I think, about AI from all these other things is that potentially there is a temptation, and maybe there is a tendency that we're actually going to merge and in some sense become partly machine.
Yeah.
If not entirely machine.
We sort of are already, in a way.
It's already happening in a way. Well,
yeah.
I'm not in favor of that. I don't, because I'm not. I don't want to be a machine.
Yeah.
And I think that we're sort of seducing ourselves into this, and we're sacrificing what makes us truly human, what sets us apart from these things. These are not conscious. The issue is that, and it's true of all technology, and this is another one of my shticks, one of my tropes, is that there's, no technology is inherently evil or good. It's the uses we put to it. It's the choices we make about how to use these things. And as a species, we're extremely clever at developing these technologies. We are not very wise in the way we use them. That's the difference between cleverness and wisdom is important, because something like AI, can be used in very destructive ways, very good ways. But the thing is, once you have a technology like this, you know that it will be put to the worst possible uses by some people, and the best possible uses by some people.
Yeah.
And we don't have to worry about those people, but the people that have no sort of ethical compass,
Yeah.
And no consciousness of what they're doing, that's very dangerous, and it's just not clear where all this is going. I mean, I'm concerned about it. There's, and it's so rapidly developing. I mean, there's so much profit to be made that all the guidelines are just being shoved aside, and for one thing, AI is environmentally, it's a complete disaster. In order to create these data centers and all that, you have to consume so much of the world's resources to just generate the electricity to run these data centers.
Yeah.
So that's a problem. And like in today's New York Times, there was a long article about brain-computer interfaces, and this technology is really rapidly developing. And again, some of this has obviously got beneficial applications. People who can't speak, who can't move, who, can't do things, it can really facilitate that.
Yeah.
But it can also be used to basically change who we are, change our consciousness. I don't know if you read the New York Times, but
no,
you should certainly read this article, because it's terrifying, frankly.
Yeah. Well, I'm nervous. I'm pretty nervous about it. We're gonna see a lot in the next few years.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of a weird place to be for me, because I'm old. I mean, let's face it, I'm old. I'm going to be 75 in December. I'm not going to be around much longer. And it's very it's odd to think that maybe I'm happy about that because I'm not going to see the worst of it. I'm going to escape like all old people. I'll escape through the doorway of death eventually and not so far ahead. You're going to have to live through the worst of it. You're going to have to live through the worst of it.
Yeah.
It's going to get really crazy bad.
Yeah. Well, thanks for
I
being
hate
one
to
of the
tell you
people,
that, but
you're one of the people who's been trying to make the conversations happen that need to happen.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so, there's a lot of people who are just leaving my generation with a world in turmoil
Yeah.
that haven't really thought about it at all. So I appreciate what you've done with your time.
Well, I'm trying. This is why we're doing these things, and I feel like the McKenna Academy, in its very small way, can be one of these nodes where these kinds of questions can be discussed. It's almost like it is like an online academy, and everything is open for conversation. So, in some small way, I want to use it to bring people together, and with the technology that we have, you could do that. People don't have to travel to conference centers and that sort of thing to do that. And
well, I remember Terrence saying, when it comes down to, what to do about all this, one of the things he said is find the others, go find them because they're out there. And it was difficult.
Yeah.
When it was just underground conferences, right?
Now it's much easier. Yeah.
It's amazing because the education institutions that we have can't always adapt or necessarily be open to all the topics that we need to talk about and be educated on. And so I think topics like how to integrate psychedelics in society and how to navigate the experiences and integrate them, and then other topics like even how society deals with things like AI. I don't think all the institutions can keep up with educating people to advance these conversations.
No, the institutions can't. People have to take responsibility. They have to take action themselves to do this. This article in the New York Times, I'll send it to you. You probably don't have a link, but it's really one of the main takeaways that I had was that this development of these neural technologies is a further step in our estrangement, our growing estrangement from nature. We're sort of moving into an era where we are more separated from nature than ever. We're looking at screens. We're immersed in these cybernetic dense webs of communication, and we've forgotten or we ignore to our detriment that there is a natural world out there. And that's the world that we have to come to terms with, because that's the world that's going to kill us if we don't get straightened out. Nature is tolerant, but only to a degree.
Yeah.
All you have to do is look at evolution and look at the number of species that are extinct, which far outnumber the number of species that exist on the planet right now, to realize that nature is a very stern mother, and not very,
she can be vicious. She can.
And sooner or later, the piper will have to be paid, and like I say, I'll be gone. But now, like these many people, like these techno wizards, these techno people in Silicon Valley and so on, they think they can upload themselves into some sort of cybernetic immortality. I'm here to tell you this is a shell game. This is bullshit. You can upload a simulation, maybe, but that won't be you.
Right. Yeah. That's
Sorry,
it's
this
sad
is
fate.
a dark conversation.
Well, it's the reality though. There's there's a huge cost to dreaming up things like that, and maybe there's a lot more benefit in a simpler approach. Our mutual friend Delvin Solkinson is very focused on teaching about permaculture,
Yes.
regenerative agricultural practices, and he says, I think it's Bill Mollison, he quotes often when he says, although the problems of the world are increasingly complex, the solutions are embarrassingly simple. And so I hope that that's true, because maybe we can listen to Delvin and people like him. And
Well, I hope so. I mean, he is certainly on the right side of the conversation. That's exactly right. You know, I admire Delvin very much. I think that he is propagating the kind of knowledge that people need to have. And whether it's being effective or not, I don't know. But one of the first things we did with the McKenna Academy when we were first getting started was we did a week-long virtual symposium with Delvin and a bunch of permaculture. The symposium was supposed to be about symbiosis, and we talked about symbiosis, which is another preoccupation, but we ended up talking about permaculture a lot, which is really a form of symbiosis. I mean, any human relationship with these plants is a symbiotic relationship, and we can talk about that too. But
yeah,
so Delvin's on the right side of the issue, and
yeah.
the thing is, we can't all go to the land and become permaculturalists. You know, this is the problem. There are 8 billion of us rats crawling over the planet like lice. You know? And how are you going to sustain that?
Oh.
And is it desirable? It's hard to imagine a future that is, I don't know, that somehow we come to terms with these things, just with the sheer weight of our impact. You know, I've been to some, I think I was at the Museum of Natural History in, I forget where it was, I guess it was New York or Washington, but there was a very interesting display about the weight of human technology versus the weight of natural things.
Yeah.
And human technology, just in terms of its weight, exceeds the weight of nature right now. So we've extracted it, and we've turned all these things into something not natural.
Yeah.
You know.
And meanwhile, the brain can compute with a tiny fraction of the energy that it takes a machine to compute.
Yes.
The same amount of information.
Right.
So we don't know how to replicate that efficiency.
Well, in a certain sense, yes. That's right, because our neural systems work at, a very low voltage, a very low temperature, and they're not disruptive, and they can do more than a supercomputer can do. But this is another reason not to put all our faith and energy and finances and everything into these artificial technologies. The problem is, I think we can curse capitalism to a certain extent, the old profit motive, and like the tech companies like Apple, Google, those types of companies they used to have environmental programs. They had goals for reducing greenhouse gases and all that, and by a few years from now we're going to have zero emissions and all that. All that's gone out the window as they go chasing after AI.
Yeah.
That's just a quaint idea. Sorry, we can't do that. We're not going to reach that goal. It's not profitable, so we'll just continue to wreck the planet. And there's got to be a limit. This can't be sustainable.
Yeah, but it's so hard for people to get out of just contributing to it. right? It's like,
Yeah,
oh,
well,
to even afford my bills, I have to go and feed this machine, you
Yeah.
know? So it's very hard
and
to...
we all are to a certain extent. I mean, there are various degrees about it. There's another. This was a great issue of the New York Times. I read it every day. It's not always this good, but there was also an article about this guy, John Kingsworthy, who has talked about this, about the you know the fight against the machine, basically. Very interesting conversation with Ross Douthat, who does these long audio interviews.
Okay.
Yeah. So anyway, I'll send you those links, and you could
Sounds
get
good.
even more depressed.
Hey there, Jesse James Carver here with a quick note from our not exactly sponsor, the Living Internet Alliance, which is my own project, along with actually a group of collaborators who are working together to host the Creator Economy Convention in Vancouver, Canada, 2026. It's happening June 5th to 7th, 2026. And you may have been hearing some announcements from our various channels. We started the Living Internet podcast, which you can find on YouTube or via the link in the description of this episode. And there's a website called thelivinginternet.com where you can learn all about the convention and why you should go. It's going to be incredible. If you're a fellow podcaster, if you are a ghostwriter, if you're trying to figure out how to build an online business of any kind, and you need some mentors, you need some network reach, and you need some education, and you need some inner transformation to become the person who is capable and understands how to be a successful creator in the modern world, well then, come along to the convention. There's going to be hundreds of fellow creators gathering in one place for 3 whole days and learning from some of the best. We've got speakers like Dan Coe, the modern writer of the playbook for the one-person business model. He's done a lot for the creator economy space in terms of transforming consciousness. And also he's made millions of dollars. So that's a good bonus. And then we have teachers like Brian Meyerhofer, he's a relationship and marriage therapist, but he's also a somatic therapy teacher, and he runs a successful online business. 70-some thousand people read his regular newsletter on Substack. Really great guy. We also have Dan Goldfield, a spiritual teacher who also helps business people lead and be effective effortlessly and live with inner peace as their default mode. And we have all kinds of really incredible people. Also Taylon Simmons, for example, who would have some liking for some of the same topics that Dennis and I are talking about. And in fact, he'll be on next week's episode. So stay tuned to listen to Taylon Simmons talk about how he grew a $500,000 a year ghostwriting business. And now how he's scaling to a 7-figure ghostwriting agency. So that's just a few of the long list of incredible speakers and activities that will be happening for this 3-day event. And tickets are going on sale for Black Friday, if you're listening to this episode when it's nice and fresh. So November 28th until December 1st, tickets will be 50% off, making them just $500 for the whole 3-day long immersion. And you'll have to coordinate for hotels. We have special rates booked, so you can get a deal and you can join our free community where you can meet fellow convention attendees, plan your travels together, plan some hotel sharing, and stay at the Sheraton Vancouver Airport Hotel or the Marriott and enjoy their beautiful location, the swimming pool, open till 10 p.m., and the 24-hour gym. It's a 10-minute shuttle from the Vancouver airport. So there's people flying in from all over the world. And I hope you fly in. I think that it's going to be worthwhile for you. If you got this far listening to my podcast and you've gravitated to what I'm creating, or if you've gravitated to some of these thinkers like Dan Coe, Dan Goldfield, Talon Simmons, Kieran Drew, Hussein Ibarra, Jack Moses. There's a few that are not immediately jumping into mind, but Natalie Agnes and Valentin Sounds, and myself. I'll be there speaking a little bit. Logan Quinn, also, who is a kind of mentor to me in the world of somatic therapy, but who also runs an online business in the Vancouver area and internationally. So go check out thelivinginternet.com or check out the links in the description to learn more, and put it on your calendar for the 50% off sale on Black Friday.
You're done good. Yeah, it's a good spot.
Thank you. Yeah, I feel lucky, and now I just got all this set up, and so I have a big list of people to host on the podcast, and
Yeah.
we'll keep it going. Eventually, maybe someone will sponsor it.
Do you have a sponsor?
No,
No,
not currently.
we don't either. We want one.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
We want at least one. We're trying to figure out how to monetize some of this stuff
Yeah,
because it's hard to raise funds,
that's the thing. Yeah.
But hopefully this ethnobotany course will bring in some, and some of these events we're planning, these online events. Do you know about Graham St. John's book about Terence?
Oh, I think so. I think I heard you and him talking about it.
Yeah, we had 2 podcasts about it. It's very interesting. It's a very interesting book. He's really done. He took like 2.5 years to write the thing.
Wow.
And he really dug deep. So it's like the definitive biography of Terence,
Yeah.
if anybody's interested.
Yeah.
And I was interested. It's a story. I learned much more about. I learned things about Terence that I didn't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's a great book. It's worth
Cool.
worth reading for sure.
Yeah, I'll take a look at some point.
Yeah.
It was very interesting when I first read your biographical account of your life with Terence, The Brotherhood of the Screaming Abyss. I had already been listening to Terence for years.
Right.
So I'd heard some of the stories about the experiment at La Chorrera and you and him becoming interested in Jung at a young age. But to hear your account of it was very cool, because sometimes, although your lives were so intertwined, they weren't always. Like, there were times where you were doing very separate things with your lives.
Absolutely.
So
yeah. What's
was
different
cool.
about this book, what this book is, I mean, the subtitle is My Life with Terence McKenna. So it's my life
Yeah.
with Terence McKenna. It's
Yeah.
not about Terence McKenna.
Right.
It's about, but Graham's book is about Terence McKenna. And because I lived through the era when, from the start, from the very beginning, and I knew these people that he talked about. So
Yeah.
it's a fascinating piece of work, and he is a very good writer.
Mm-hmm.
So
I'll take a look at it.
yeah, you should ask him on your podcast sometime.
Yeah.
he might be.
That'd be cool.
We're going to do this online interactive event probably in early December with him and some of the people that he interviewed and contributed to the book. It should be an interesting thing.
Yeah, on that note about the courses starting up, will Wade Davis happen to have any involvement?
Yes, in the courses?
Yeah.
Yes, he has a section.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I've been wanting to catch up with his latest, his most recent work. I know he's done a lot with writing about and looking at the situation with Colombia and the coca leaf.
Right.
So.
Right. And we did this coca summit with the McKenna Academy. So he was there. He was one of the chief organizers. He was really all in because this is an issue of very great concern to him. He and Andy Weil did a podcast together for that summit, which you can listen to,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a very good thing. And he got an article published in the New York Times shortly after that summit, so that's there. And I have that as a PDF. I can send it to you if you're interested.
That'd be great.
And there, so it's interesting the way that coca is kind of emerging as an issue, and people are beginning to understand that the coca leaf is has been unfairly maligned.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting way to approach maybe the conversation about symbiosis versus, uh, you know, I don't know, maladaptive relationships with plants, right? Because the people of Colombia have used coca in a healthy way that's defined a lot of their culture for
Yeah, yeah,
thousands of years.
and it's quite beneficial, you know.
And
Yeah.
yet we know of cocaine and
And cocaine is not beneficial.
not at all. No.
I mean, only for certain things, but cocaine is one of those things that it's a good example of the. Are we recording now or not?
Yeah, we're on.
Oh, we are.
Yeah.
Okay. It's a good example of one of those things of cleverness overtakes wisdom. We've taken this perfectly benign plant, beneficial in so many ways, about as dangerous as green tea, and we've managed to focus in on the single most toxic, most destructive alkaloid in the whole shebang. And then we've gotten the rest of it, and then we dismiss the rest of it.
Yeah.
And so the preoccupation with cocaine has completely disreputized, created this stigma about the coca leaf. Like Wade is fond of saying, it's like saying vodka is not, the potato is not vodka, the coca
Right.
leaf is not cocaine. And the whole issue around cocaine, I mean, the reason cocaine is valuable, that the cartels, can extract it and run these international rings, it's because it's illegal. It's only because it's illegal. If cocaine were legalized, it wouldn't be worth shit. It's only worth a few dollars, You should be able to go, if you want to abuse cocaine, that's your business. You should go to a drugstore and get a prescription and have at it, But this whole idea that, if you basically legalize it, or you destabilize the whole cartel international structure, there's no profit motive. And what drives the cartels is profit motive, and the only reason it's worth anything is because it's been maintained as illegal. And that serves the purpose of the cartels, and it serves the purposes of the governments that keep it illegal. I mean, everybody's to blame.
Yeah.
Everybody's got their hand in the pots, and nobody is really they're all making money off of it one way or another. So they're not really committed to finding a solution.
Yeah. It's a complicated situation.
Yeah. And yeah, it is. And the same kind of situation goes with most attempts to control these substances, And prohibition never works because you create an incentive for people to make a profit on the black market from them, and people are motivated to make money. So it's such a simple solution, but it probably won't happen.
Well, one thing that's kind of amazing about your life and story is how many people involved in this scene of researching fungi and psychedelics and have kind of stayed in the game and stayed friends and connected for a long time, right? You've been connected with Paul Stamets for a long time,
Yeah.
Wade Davis, people who have had a huge impact. They've really they've accomplished something quite substantial. What has kept? What do you think? What do you think it is that's brought such people together and kept people so committed to their work?
Well, it's complex, you know. I mean, people get obsessed with different things, you know. And I mean, I got interested in psychedelics because I was curious about the experiences, you know, and about understanding consciousness and all of those things. And I mean, psychedelics remain probably the single most useful tool for understanding consciousness and the whole brain mind, you know, conundrum. They're probes for understanding consciousness. And then in the process of learning about that, I learned about the indigenous connections and that, you know, I mean, two things really affected my commitment to studying psychedelics. One was the uh, at the age, so this book here, the ethnopharmacologic search for psychoactive drugs. The original conference uh, was held in 1967 in San Francisco. It was a private conference. Nobody got anything out of it except the book that was published by the US government printing office. And somehow or other, I mean, I was already interested in drugs, but I didn't really know, I didn't have a direction, you know. But then this book came into my life after it was published. So I must have been 18. And it made me realize ethnopharmacology. It's a real thing. There are scientists working on this. There's a body of literature. There were many scientists, maybe a few dozen at most. Most of them had contributions to that conference. But I read that book from cover to cover, and I realized this is a direction to go. And about the same time, Terrence gave me the teachings of Don Juan for my 18th birthday. So that was the other side. That was the other side. There's this whole indigenous thing. And of course, I think you understand now that the teachings of Don Juan is mostly fiction, mostly it's bullshit. But I didn't know that at the time. And it doesn't really matter. It made me aware that there was that these things were not new. There was an ancient practice, and there was all sorts of indigenous wisdom about them. So those two pages, in a sense, defined what became my career. And it was like I said, I can pursue a career in ethnopharmacology. I mean, in a very simplistic sense, being 18, you know, I said, hey, I can get paid to get stoned.
Yeah.
You know, that was really
sophisticated life planning.
Yeah, I can do it. I can do it legitimately and so on. But that's what led me into it, you know. And I had a few breaks, you know. And it's interesting when you look back on a person's career, you know, the breaks that you have and the challenges that you had. And I was lucky. I had some great mentors as an undergraduate. You know, or as a graduate student, I did my work at the University of Hawaii for my master's, and that guy, Sandy Siegel, was one of the most incredible out-of-the-box thinkers I've ever been associated with. And he was an environmental toxicologist. He knew nothing about, he didn't know nothing, but he wasn't interested in psychedelics or anything like that. But the interesting thing is, his specialty was actually exobiology. He was studying extraterrestrial life. Well, there wasn't any extraterrestrial life to study, so what he was studying was extreme environments and things that lived in extreme environments, like volcanic vents and that kind of thing. And that to me was just so cool. And he was such an unconventional thinker that he was really inspiring, you know, to not just me, but all of his students. We just loved him because he was an out-of-the-box thinker. And I was blessed with him.
Yeah.
And then because of him, I got to go to UBC and study psilocybin because Neil Towers, my supervisor at UBC, was one of Sandy's friends. And he would come to Hawaii once in a while, and Sandy would always, whenever a dignitary, visiting scientist would come, he'd invite all the graduate students to his house. We'd sit around, drink beer, eat pizza, and shoot the shit, just talk. And Neil Towers was one of those people that I met that way. And when he let slip that he had somebody working on psilocybin, he had a a master's student working on just one enzyme in the psilocybin pathway, and she wasn't getting very far with it. But anyhow, this came up, and when it did, I said, I practically spit my coffee out, and I said, well, Dr. Towers, I have some interest in that. Would you consider letting me take on this problem? And very, very casual, but then we followed up, and no email in those days, but through correspondence, and he let me come work for him. And I worked on psilocybin for the first year I was here. And so that's one of the breaks that you get, And as a postdoc, after I got my PhD, I had other mentors who were not as good, some mentors, some people I had that I did postdocs with at NIH, for example, were, sociopathic, maniacal, just basically, difficult people to work with.
Yeah.
But I still was able to do work with them, and we got some stuff done. So a lot of where your career goes depends on a lot on the people that you work with. I've always said mentors, I think, are more important than the institution. You can do your work at Harvard, but if you're working for jerks, it doesn't matter. I worked at the University of Hawaii, which is not the top university in the kingdom, but I worked for Sandy Siegel, who was just a genius, and that was amazing. And the same in some ways, the same at NIH. I ended up working with Juan Saavedra, who was, very difficult, this Prussian aristocrat who had paranoid personality disorder and things like that. But it didn't matter in a way, because I was working in the same lab that Julius Axelrod, who was the person that won the Nobel Prize for the process of neurotransmission, and one of the first people to isolate DMT from rabbit's lung and demonstrate that DMT was an endogenous molecule. And so there was this whole, I did the work at NIH sort of under the shadow of these giants of neuroscience who had worked in the same lab. I mean, I wasn't a neuroscientist. I was pretending to be a neuroscientist. I was there because I had an opportunity to do some work in neuroscience, but I thought of myself at the time, I'm just a humble botanist. I'm just, on vacation in a way. But interesting thing, I don't know if I've told you this story, but an interesting thing is, so I was working in Saavedra's lab, and he said, there are a bunch of compounds that he pointed to the cabinet in the lab up on the top. And he said, there's a box of some compounds up there that we had made a few years ago. You should go through that and take a look and see if anything's useful. And if you can't, keep it back and throw it, send the rest to chemical waste, get rid of these things. So I went through this box, and right beside the box was a pristine, mint condition, never opened copy of the ethnopharmacologic search for psychoactive drugs.
Whoa.
Which I had already had, which I had from the age of 18, but this was a perfect mint condition copy. And I just sort of quietly slipped that in my jacket and squirreled it out of the lab.
Yeah.
But I took it as an omen in some ways, I mean, what a discovery.
Yeah.
And as it turns out, of course, one of the scientists that worked in that lab was one of the main presenters in that symposium, and one of the people um, that figured out that beta carbolines were monoamine oxidase inhibitors. That work was done in this lab, which was Axelrod's lab, and then it was Saavedra's lab.
Yeah.
So it's like synchronicity almost, you
Yeah.
know, very interesting thing.
Yeah, it resonates a lot with me because I've had the same experience with, although I haven't really found my career yet, what I have found so far has been very synchronously guided. You know, when I went to university, it was more about individual professors who had connections for me and opportunities, doors to open. Or like a strange box in a hallway with some free stuff in it that turns out, oh,
Yeah.
suddenly this connects with what I'm doing.
And that's the way it works. If you're lucky, you know, if you're lucky. And I felt really lucky. And I felt, uh, I mean, I was driven by my passion was to understand psychedelics. This was what put fire in my belly, basically. I didn't care about academic success. I didn't care about becoming a tenured professor, publishing, you know, reams and reams of paper. I worked for people that had done that, Neil Towers and Juan Saavedra and Sandy Siegel, all these people. I mean, my publication record is very modest compared to theirs, but I didn't really care. I wasn't interested in playing the academic game. Some people would say, and maybe they'd say, yeah, well, you're a failed academic. Yeah, okay, guilty. But I got to study what I wanted to.
Yeah.
And as a mere graduate student, I was able to work with controlled substances legally and do interesting things with them. So that was very satisfying. And then, you know, I worked initially for Neil. When I came to Neil's lab, I was going to work on psilocybin biosynthesis and characterize the enzymes in psilocybin and look at the genetic regulation of psilocybin biosynthesis and for the first year I worked on that, which gave me the opportunity to requisition a growth chamber in the basement of the biology building and fill it with mushrooms.
Wow.
And grow mushrooms.
Yeah.
Which I did. So I'd have material, you know. Well, somehow those mushrooms found their way out of the lab. I can't imagine how they did.
Right.
But anyway, I did that, and but then after a while, my first year at UBC was kind of rough because I had a bad accident the first semester, bicycle accident that landed me in the hospital.
Cool.
So on top of having that, because of that partly, I was failing fungal genetics. I was failing chemistry. I was just not keeping up with my courses. So I was getting very depressed. And Neil could see this, and he called me into his office one day, and he said, well, I've got some extra money in the grant this time. Maybe you'd like to go to Peru. And I'm just like, thank God. I'm not going to be a fungal geneticist. I'm not a biochemist. And so I said, yeah, absolutely. And I shifted from mushrooms to ayahuasca and never looked back, really.
Yeah.
I went to Peru and I got all that field experience and did that. And
ayahuasca became and kind of was from the start a very important part of your whole...
Very important part of my profession and my personal life, right. And so then when I graduated, I was able to get this grant, this fellowship at NIH and at the Laboratory of Clinical Pharmacology. And the reason I was able to get it largely was because Juan Saavedra and Neil Towers had been on the RV Heraclitus Amazon expedition in 1979 together. and that was RV Heraclitus, or RV, it wasn't the RV Heraclitus, that was another one. It was the RV, I forget what the name of the research vessel was, but it was a Scripps Institution of Oceanography research vessel that went up the Amazon with a lot of these people that were in this book, and Neil was one of those, and Juan Saavedra was one of those, so they knew each other. So then when I went to NIH, Juan Saavedra knew who I was. He knew the connection to Neil Powers.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know whether that helped me get the fellowship or not. I suspect it may have. And even though he was a complete jerk, we were still able to do some pioneering work together. So I guess that whole shtick, that whole rap, that whole detour that I went on is just a narrative of the way that synchronicity works in my career, the way that unexpected connections made it possible to follow this path. I don't think many people have that when they get into these high pressure careers. They are really being an ambitious academic in science, in neuroscience or medicine. It's almost like boot camp.
Yeah.
I mean, it can be very spirit killing.
Mm-hmm.
And I've talked with many people that have been through that, and on the surface, they're absolutely, totally successful. And by all outward appearances, they're totally successful, but they're miserable, and that's a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Because the system has beaten them down. I mean, that's an interesting thing. Something recently happened that maybe illustrates this. Do you know this? Have you ever heard of a guy named Noah Williams?
I don't think so.
So he was a neuroscientist at Stanford, and absolutely at the top of his game. A really well-respected neuroscientist, and he was working on ibogaine, and he was doing groundbreaking work on ibogaine and kind of bringing ibogaine forward as the next promising psychedelics that could potentially be used to address things beyond addiction. Ibogaine is known for treating addiction, but it's way beyond that. It can be used for traumatic brain injury and cognitive deficits and potentially even Parkinson's, a whole spectrum of things. And so he had been doing this work on ibogaine that led to the recognition of its therapeutic potential, and other people have noticed, and basically because of his work there was funding that showed up in, oddly enough, the most unexpected place, Texas. The Texas legislature made like $50 million available to work on ibogaine because it's used to treat veterans, right? So that's the thing. So he was doing incredible work, and I met him. I didn't really know him, but I met him at Psychedelic Science in June this year, and I was introduced to him by Lucy Walker, who is a filmmaker who made this incredible movie about ibogaine, and it was largely about Noah Williams. A couple of months ago, so we have this WhatsApp group, right, and called Sentient Others, and a couple of months ago, I came across the WhatsApp group that Noah Williams committed suicide, which was just, I mean, I was just shattered, because I saw him at Psychedelic Science, and I thought, if ever there was a guy who is at the top of his game, this is the guy, and I was just shocked, and it's like, And it's so interesting that he was working on suicide. You know, he'd been working on the therapy for suicide, and he'd committed suicide.
Yeah.
And it's not clear why he did, but that just shows you that, you know, you can look at somebody from the outside and they seem to have it completely together,
Yeah.
and inside they're just a mess. You know, they're just very, very not happy. And it's really a shame because he was a brilliant man and very highly respected by everybody and
Yeah.
so on. So that's life. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can't tell from external measures of success.
Yeah.
If,
So I kind of got off on that tangent, but anyway, we've
well,
covered some territory here.
yeah. The thing about talking to you, Dennis, is that we opened so many rabbit holes that we could go down, and there's so many profoundly interesting topics when it comes to plants and fungi and consciousness, and so man, we could go on all day, and I could and we
Yeah.
could have a lot
Well,
more
I
of
think
these.
I think the takeaway is we've got to do this again. We have to do this more often.
That'd be excellent.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'd like to dive into some more sciencey stuff even at some point. I mean, one of the courses you're offering is on plant biochemistry, right?
Yes.
So I think that some people might want to tune in to get a little more into some of the, you know, the beauty and the mystery of how these things actually work. How do plants
Yeah.
do what they do, and how does the brain do what it does? And
Yeah. We can
so,
talk about that. We can talk about that, but probably at another point because
yes.
I'm getting burned out now.
Well, thanks for spending this time with me, Dennis.
Yeah, it's been
always a pleasure.
It's been great. I've enjoyed it. Hope I haven't bored you too much. I think we had a good conversation.
I think so.
So,
Very, very good time.